They say a wedding day is filled with surprises, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment my husband of 30 years stood up during our daughter's reception and casually announced he had sold our family home, without telling a soul. As I sat there in my mother-of-the-bride dress, watching my daughter's perfect day crumble before my eyes, I realized that sometimes the people we trust the most are capable of the deepest betrayals. I've spent my entire adult life building memories, in our Victorian house in coastal Maine, where the salty air and foggy mornings have been as much a part of our family as the people inside it. For 3 decades, I've taught piano lessons in the sun-drenched front room, watching generations of children grow up as their fingers danced across my baby grand. Every scratch on the hardwood floors, every nick in the banister, every creak in the stairs tells a story, our story. At least, that's what I thought until that fateful Saturday in June when everything I believed about my marriage shattered like fine china on marble floors. The morning of Emma's wedding had started perfectly. The weather was exactly what every bride dreams of: bright sunshine with a gentle breeze coming off the Atlantic, carrying the scent of salt and summer roses. I was in the master bedroom, helping Emma with her dress, the same room where I'd nursed her through countless fevers, braided her hair for first dates, and wiped away tears after heartbreaks. The antique mirror that had been my grandmother's reflected 3 generations of women: me, Emma, and my mother, all of us dabbing at our eyes and trying not to ruin our makeup. "Mom, stop crying," Emma laughed, though her own eyes were glistening. "You'll make me start, and this mascara cost a fortune." She looked absolutely radiant in her vintage-style lace gown, her dark hair swept up in an elegant knot, a few curls framing her face just like I'd worn my hair on my own wedding day. "I can't help it," I said, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from her dress. "You look so beautiful, sweetheart." I caught my mother's eye in the mirror, and we shared a knowing smile. She had done this for me 30 years ago, in this very room, when I married Richard. Richard. My husband was downstairs, somewhere, probably fussing with his bow tie or making sure the caterers had everything they needed. He'd been acting strange lately, distracted, spending long hours at his investment firm, taking phone calls in the garden where he thought I couldn't hear him. I'd brushed it off as stress about the wedding, about giving away his only daughter. If only I'd paid more attention to those warning signs, those little moments that now seem so glaringly obvious in hindsight. The ceremony at the local church was beautiful, everything running smoothly despite my perfectionist daughter's worries. As Emma and James exchanged their vows, I squeezed Richard's hand, remembering our own wedding day. He squeezed back, but now I wonder if he was already thinking about what he was going to do later. If he was already calculating how to drop his bomb at the perfect moment for maximum impact. We returned to our house for the reception. The backyard had been transformed into a fairy tale setting, with white tents, twinkling lights, and tables decorated with hydrangeas and roses from my garden. The same garden where Emma had taken her first steps, where we'd hosted countless summer barbecues, where Richard had built her a treehouse that still stood in the old maple tree. Everything was perfect, or so it seemed. The first hint that something was wrong came during the cocktail hour. I was mingling with guests, accepting compliments about the beautiful ceremony and the house's decorations, when I overheard a snippet of conversation between Richard and James's father. Something about closing dates and paperwork. At the time, I assumed they were discussing James and Emma's new house. The young couple had just bought their first home together in Boston. It wasn't until after the main course, as servers were clearing plates and the band was setting up for the first dance, that Richard clinked his glass and stood up. I expected the usual father of the bride speech, something heartfelt about watching his little girl grow up, about welcoming James to the family. Instead, what came next would turn our perfect day into something from a nightmare. "I have an announcement to make," Richard said, his voice carrying across the tent. There was something in his tone that made my stomach clench, a note of forced cheerfulness that I'd learned to recognize over 30 years of marriage. As some of you know, I've been planning a surprise. Catherine, darling, I've sold the house. The world seemed to stop. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Around me, the cheerful wedding chatter died away, replaced by a heavy silence broken only by the distant sound of waves against the shore. I stared at my husband, waiting for the punchline, for him to laugh and say it was all a joke. But his face remained fixed in that artificial smile, his eyes never quite meeting mine. "We close next week," he continued, as if he were announcing a vacation plan or a dinner reservation. "I've found us a beautiful condo in Florida. It's time for a change, a fresh start. No more New England winters, no more maintaining this old house. We can finally live the retirement life we've always talked about." Except we hadn't. We'd never talked about leaving Maine, about selling the house, about moving to Florida. I'd always imagined growing old here, watching our grandchildren play in the same garden where Emma had spent her childhood. The room started to spin slightly, the faces of our guests blurring together like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. I felt Emma's hand grip mine under the table. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Did you know about this?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. 30 years of marriage, and my husband had sold our home without a single word to me. The home where our daughter had grown up, the home where I'd built my business, my life, my identity. "A toast," Richard declared, raising his champagne glass, seemingly oblivious to the shock rippling through the tent. "To new beginnings." A few confused guests half-heartedly raised their glasses, but most sat in stunned silence, eyes darting between Richard and me. I could see James's parents exchanging worried glances. My mother, seated at the far end of the table, had her hand pressed to her mouth in horror. That's when Emma stood up, her wedding dress rustling like angry whispers. "How could you?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the awkward silence. "How could you do this today of all days? This is my wedding." Richard's smile faltered. "For the first time. Sweetheart, I thought it would be perfect timing. The whole family's here to celebrate new beginnings. Your new life with James, our new life in Florida. The house isn't just yours to sell." I finally found my voice, though it sounded strange and distant to my own ears. "My name is on the deed. I run my business from there. It's all been taken care of," Richard cut in smoothly, that artificial smile still plastered on his face. "I've had my lawyer handle everything. The paperwork just needs your signature. Trust me, Catherine, this is for the best." Trust him? The word echoed in my head like a cruel joke. How could I trust someone who had just pulled the rug out from under my entire life in front of 100 wedding guests? The band, who had been setting up for the first dance, stood awkwardly with their instruments, unsure whether to begin playing. The wedding planner hovered nearby, her clipboard clutched to her chest, looking desperately between Emma and me for some sign of what to do next. "I think," my mother's voice cut through the tension as she rose from her seat with the dignity of someone who had weathered many storms, "that this is a discussion best saved for another time. Today is Emma and James's day." But the damage was already done. The magical atmosphere of the wedding had evaporated like morning mist, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. I could see guests whispering behind their hands, could feel their pitying glances. My daughter's perfect day had been hijacked by her father's bombshell, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. As the band finally began to play, trying desperately to salvage what was left of the celebration, I sat there in my carefully chosen mother-of-the-bride dress, feeling like I was watching someone else's life unravel. The house had been my anchor, my safe harbor in every storm. Now that anchor had been ripped away, and I was adrift in waters I never thought I'd have to navigate. Richard tried to take my hand under the table, but I pulled away. In that moment, looking at his familiar profile, Against the backdrop of our soon-to-be former home, I realized I was looking at a stranger. Who was this man who could make such a monumental decision without consulting me? Who could choose this moment, our daughter's wedding day, to drop this bomb? The answer would come later, but for now, I had to somehow hold myself together. For Emma. For our guests. For the shreds of dignity I had left. But as I watched couples begin to drift onto the dance floor, as I saw Emma being led away by James, her shoulders shaking with barely contained emotion, I made a silent promise to myself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and awkward conversations. I went through the motions, cutting the cake, watching the father-daughter dance that now seemed like a cruel parody, accepting condolences, poorly disguised as congratulations from well-meaning guests, all while my mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle of how this could have happened. As the evening wore on, I found myself in the kitchen, ostensibly checking on the catering staff, but really just seeking a moment of solitude. Through the window, I could see the party continuing in the backyard, the twinkling lights now seeming more mocking than magical. That's where Sarah, my best friend of 25 years, found me. "Kathy," she said softly, closing the kitchen door behind her. I just heard. I was in the bathroom during the announcement. She paused, then added, "I think I might know something." I turned to face her, my hands gripping the edge of the counter I'd picked out with Richard 15 years ago, during our kitchen renovation. "What do you mean?" Sarah glanced around, making sure we were alone. "Last week, I saw Richard having lunch with Jennifer Blake at the Marina restaurant." Jennifer Blake. The name hit me like a physical blow. She was one of Portland's most successful real estate agents, known for handling high-end properties and discreet sales. More importantly, she was Richard's ex-girlfriend from college, someone he'd sworn he hadn't spoken to in decades. They looked intimate, Sarah continued, clearly uncomfortable with the revelation. "I was going to tell you, but then with the wedding preparations and everything." She trailed off, wringing her hands. The pieces started falling into place. The late nights at the office, the secret phone calls, the mysterious meetings. Had Richard been planning this for weeks, months, years? And Jennifer, had she been involved in more than just the house sale? "I need to see his phone," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "And his laptop." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You think?" "I don't know what to think anymore," I cut her off. "But I'm going to find out." Just then, Emma appeared in the doorway, her wedding dress slightly wilted from hours of celebrating, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "Mom," she said, "James and I want you to come stay with us in Boston, just until—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Sweetheart, this is your honeymoon time. You should be." "Our honeymoon's already ruined," she said bluntly. "Dad made sure of that. Please, Mom. I don't want you here alone with him." I looked at my daughter, so strong, so determined, so much like me at her age, and felt a surge of maternal pride mixed with heartache. She shouldn't have to deal with this on her wedding day. She should be dancing with her new husband, not worrying about her mother's living situation. "I'll be fine," I assured her, crossing the kitchen to pull her into a hug. "I need to stay. Here, at least for now. There are things I need to figure out." Over Emma's shoulder, I caught a glimpse of Richard through the window, chatting with James's parents as if nothing was wrong. As if he hadn't just detonated our entire life. In the soft evening light, he looked exactly the same as he had this morning. Same silver-streaked hair, same charming smile, same well-fitted tuxedo. But now I saw him with new eyes, wondering what other secrets lurked behind that familiar facade. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The wedding planner's assistant poked her head in. The band is asking if you want to do the last dance now. I straightened my spine, smoothed my dress. Yes, I said, summoning every ounce of dignity I possessed. Tell them to play the way we were. It seems appropriate. Sarah squeezed my hand. Emma looked like she wanted to object, but stayed silent. As I walked back out to the tent, I felt like an actress stepping onto a stage, playing the role of the happy mother of the bride one last time. But beneath that performance, my mind was already working, planning, calculating. First thing tomorrow, I would call my friend Lisa, who happened to be one of the best divorce attorneys in Portland. I would check our bank accounts, credit cards, investment portfolios. I would find out exactly what Richard had been up to with Jennifer Blake. But tonight, I would dance. I would smile. I would make sure that what was left of my daughter's wedding wasn't completely overshadowed by her father's betrayal. As the opening notes of the song filled the tent, Richard approached me, hand extended, that same artificial smile still in place. "Shall we, darling?" I took his hand, noting how familiar it felt in mine after 30 years. How many secrets had these hands been keeping from me? As we began to move across the dance floor, I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "You have no idea what you've just started." I felt him stiffen slightly, his step faltering for just a moment. Good. Let him worry. Let him wonder what I knew, what I suspected, what I planned to do. Because one thing was certain. Richard might have sold our house without my knowledge, but he was about to learn that he'd married a woman who didn't take betrayal lightly. The morning after the wedding dawned gray and misty, fitting my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night in my piano room, running my fingers over the keys without playing, not wanting to wake Richard, who was sleeping in our bedroom. Or at least pretending to. The same bedroom where just yesterday morning I'd helped Emma get ready for her wedding, blissfully unaware that my life was about to implode. I waited until I heard Richard's shower running before making my move. His laptop was in his study, where he'd been spending increasingly long hours lately. I knew his password, or at least I thought I did. After 3 failed attempts, I realized he'd changed it. When had that happened? How long had he been keeping secrets? But I hadn't spent 30 years managing a household without learning a few tricks. Opening his desk drawer, I found his agenda, the paper one he still insisted on using despite having everything on his phone. Tucked inside was a small yellow sticky note with what looked like a random string of numbers and letters. My hands shaking slightly, I tried it on the laptop. Success. The first thing I noticed was his email. He'd left his personal account open, and right at the top was a thread with Jennifer Blake. My stomach churned as I clicked on it, each message feeling like another twist of the knife. Everything's set for closing next week. The buyers are eager to move in by month's end. Perfect timing with the wedding. Catherine will be too distracted to notice anything amiss. The condo in Naples is ready whenever you are. Views are spectacular. Naples. Not just Florida, but Naples specifically, where Jennifer Blake had conveniently opened a new office 6 months ago. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. I heard the shower stop and quickly forwarded the entire email thread to myself, along with any other suspicious-looking correspondence I could find. Then I cleared the browser history and shut down the laptop, my heart pounding. By the time Richard came downstairs, dressed in his casual Sunday best as if nothing had happened, I was sitting at the kitchen island, calmly sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone. "Good morning, darling," he said, his voice artificially bright. "Quite a party last night, wasn't it?" I looked up at him, this man I thought I knew better than myself, and felt a chill run down my spine. How long had he been planning this? How many mornings had he sat here, drinking coffee with me, all while orchestrating the destruction of our life together? "Lisa Carlton called," I said casually, watching his reaction. "She's free for lunch today." The coffee pot paused midway. to his cup. Lisa's reputation as a divorce attorney was well known in our social circle. "Why would you be having lunch with Lisa?" he asked, trying and failing to keep his tone light. "Oh, I think you know exactly why, Richard." I stood up, pushing my untouched coffee away. "By the way, how's Jennifer Blake these days? Still enjoying her new office in Naples?" The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "Catherine, it's not what you think." "Really?" "Because I think you've been planning to sell our home and move to Florida with your college sweetheart for months now. I think you chose our daughter's wedding day to announce it because you thought I wouldn't make a scene. I think you've been lying to me for so long that you've forgotten what the truth feels like." "That's ridiculous," he sputtered, but his eyes darted away from mine. "Jennifer's just handling the sale. She got us an excellent price." "Save? It." I cut him off. "I saw the emails, Richard. All of them." He set his coffee cup down with a clatter, coffee sloshing over the rim onto the pristine granite countertop. "You went through my laptop? That's private?" "Private?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Like selling the house I've lived in for 30 years without telling me? Like planning to move to Naples without consulting your wife? That kind of private?" For a moment, we stood there in our soon-to-be former kitchen, the silence broken only by the steady drip of the coffee maker and the distant sound of waves. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday morning. The copper pots hanging above the island, the herbs growing in the window box, the children's artwork still proudly displayed on the refrigerator. But nothing would ever be the same again. "I was going to tell you," Richard finally said, his voice quiet. "After the wedding, I had it all planned out." "Oh, I'm sure you did. Just like you had the sale planned out, the move planned out, your whole new life with Jennifer planned out." I moved toward the door, grabbing my car keys from the hook. "Well, guess what? I've got some plans of my own." "Where are you going?" he called after me, panic finally creeping into his voice. I turned back to look at him one last time, this stranger wearing my husband's face. "To see Lisa Carlton." "And Richard?" "I'd start looking for a good lawyer of your own. You're going to need one." Lisa's office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian in Portland's Old Port District, with views of the harbor that would normally have captured my attention. Today, I barely noticed them. I sat in her elegant conference room, surrounded by dark wood paneling and maritime paintings, watching as she reviewed the emails I'd forwarded to myself from Richard's laptop. "Well," she said finally, removing her reading glasses and fixing me with a steady gaze. "He's been busy, hasn't he?" I laughed hollowly. That's one way to put it. "The good news," Lisa continued, shuffling through the papers on her desk, "is that he can't legally sell the house without your signature. The bad news is that this goes deeper than just the house." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" Lisa pulled up something on her computer, turning the screen so I could see it. "One of my paralegals did some quick research. 3 months ago, Richard incorporated a new company in Florida. 2 weeks later, a property management LLC was registered in Naples under Jennifer Blake's name. Care to guess who the silent partner is?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "Richard?" "Got it in one." Lisa leaned back in her chair. "They've been buying up luxury condos along the Gulf Coast. 5 properties so far, all purchased within the last 2 months. The down payments came from somewhere, and I'm willing to bet if we dig into your joint accounts, we'll find some interesting transactions." My hands began to shake. I'd been so focused on the house, on the betrayal of his planned move to Florida, that I hadn't even considered the possibility of financial infidelity. How much are we talking about?" Lisa's expression softened. "Catherine, when was the last time you looked at your joint investment accounts?" I tried to remember. Richard had always handled our investments, claiming his expertise as a financial advisor made him better suited for it. I'd trusted him, focused on running my piano studio and managing our day-to-day expenses. I'm not sure. A few months? Ago, maybe. She nodded as if this confirmed something. I think it's time we got forensic accountants involved. And, Catherine, we need to act fast. The fact that he chose your daughter's wedding to announce the house sale suggests he's working on a timeline. He might have other moves planned that we don't know about yet. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Mom, are you okay? James and I are worried. Call me when you can. Sweet Emma, who should be enjoying her first day of married life instead of worrying about her mother. I texted back quickly. I'm fine. Meeting with Lisa Carlton. We'll call later. Love you. Your daughter's support will be important, Lisa said, watching me. But right now, we need to focus on protecting your assets. I'm going to file an emergency injunction to prevent any further property sales or large financial transactions. Then we'll... She was interrupted by another buzz from my phone. This time it was Sarah. You need to see this. Jennifer Blake just posted on Instagram. Call me ASAP. Excuse me, I said to Lisa, my fingers already dialing Sarah's number. She answered on the first ring. Kathy, I'm so sorry, but you need to know. Jennifer posted a picture an hour ago. She's on a balcony overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. The caption says New Beginnings with a heart emoji. My free hand clenched into a fist. Where exactly was this taken? According to the location tag, the Naples Grande Beach Resort. Lisa, who had been pretending not to listen, straightened in her chair. Catherine? What is it? I put the phone on speaker and asked Sarah to send me the post. When it popped up on my screen, I turned it to show Lisa. There was Jennifer, looking exactly as I remembered her from college. Tall, blonde, eternally youthful, standing on a luxurious balcony with the Gulf of Mexico spreading out behind her. She was holding a champagne glass and wearing an expression of smug satisfaction that made me want to reach through the screen and wipe it off her face. But it was the other details that caught my attention. In the reflection of the sliding glass door behind her, I could see someone else. Someone holding a camera. Someone with silver-streaked hair and a familiar stance. Well, Lisa said grimly, I think we can guess where your husband is right now. The rage that had been simmering inside me since last night suddenly boiled over. While I'd been sitting in our kitchen this morning, watching him play innocent and make excuses, his bags had probably already been packed. He'd probably gone straight from our conversation to the airport. Lisa, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. Exactly how much trouble would I be in if I forwarded these pictures to every country club member in Portland? A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Let's hold off on that for now. I have a better idea. She reached for her phone. I know a wonderful private investigator who specializes in financial fraud, and I think it's time we started building a case that will make your husband wish he'd never heard of Naples, Florida. Marcus Reynolds looked nothing like the private investigators I'd seen in movies. No worn trench coat, no world-weary expression, no cigarette dangling from his lips. Instead, he arrived at Lisa's office 2 hours later, wearing a crisp navy suit and carrying a laptop that looked like it cost more than my car. His silver-rimmed glasses and neatly trimmed beard gave him the appearance of a university professor, rather than someone who uncovered hidden assets for a living. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, shaking my hand firmly. I've already started preliminary research based on what Lisa told me. You might want to sit down for this. I sank into one of Lisa's leather chairs, gripping the armrests. How bad is it? Marcus opened his laptop, pulling up a series of spreadsheets and documents. Over the past 6 months, your husband has systematically moved money from your joint investment accounts into a series of shell companies. The property management LLC with Jennifer Blake is just the tip of the iceberg. He turned the screen toward me, pointing out transaction after transaction. See these transfers? Small enough to avoid immediate attention, but they add up. He's been moving money through at least 3 different offshore accounts. then filtering it back into the United States through the Florida corporations. How much? I barely recognized my own voice. Marcus glanced at Lisa before answering. Based on what we've traced so far, just over $2 million. The room started spinning. $2 million. Our retirement savings, our investment portfolio, the money we'd set aside for Emma's future children's college funds, all gone. But that's not all, Marcus continued, his voice gentle but firm. The house sale? The buyers are another shell. Company ultimately controlled by Jennifer Blake's property management firm. They're planning to flip it for a significant profit. Your husband's been orchestrating both sides of the transaction. Lisa leaned forward. Which means we can prove fraud. The sale price is well below market value. He's essentially selling it to himself through Jennifer's company. I thought about my piano studio, about the generations of students who'd learned to play in that sun-drenched room, about the garden I'd tended for 3 decades, about the memories soaked into every wall and floorboard. Can we stop the sale? Already done, Lisa said with satisfaction. I filed the emergency injunction an hour ago. Richard can't move forward with the sale, and he can't access any of your joint accounts or assets. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Emma. Mom, Dad's not answering his phone. James's parents are asking what's going on. Should I tell them anything? Sweet, protective Emma, still trying to manage the fallout from her ruined wedding day. I texted back, tell them the truth. Your father can deal with the consequences of his actions. Mrs. Mitchell, Marcus said, drawing my attention back to his laptop, there's something else you should see. He pulled up what looked like surveillance photos. These were taken last month at the Naples Grand. Your husband and Ms. Blake weren't just planning business ventures. The photos showed Richard and Jennifer at dinner, walking on the beach, sharing intimate moments that made my stomach turn. But it was the last photo that really caught my attention. They were meeting with someone in what looked like a hotel conference room, signing documents spread across a table. That man with them? Marcus pointed to a distinguished-looking gentleman in an expensive suit. That's Harold Whitman, one of the biggest real estate developers in Florida. And based on the documents we've obtained, they're planning something much bigger than just flipping your house. Lisa straightened in her chair. Harold Whitman? The same Harold Whitman who's been buying up historic properties all along the New England coast? Marcus nodded grimly. The very same. It seems your husband and Ms. Blake have been helping him identify vulnerable properties, homes owned by older couples, people going through divorces, estates in probate. They've been targeting properties they can acquire below market value, using inside information from Richard's financial advisory business. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Richard hadn't just betrayed me, he'd betrayed his clients. People who trusted him with their life savings and financial futures. How many other families had he helped destroy? We need to contact the Securities and Exchange Commission, Lisa said, already reaching for her phone. This goes way beyond divorce proceedings now. We're looking at securities fraud, wire fraud, possibly even RICO violations. Wait, I said, holding up a hand. An idea was forming in my mind. Before we go to the SEC, I want to know everything. Every property they're targeting, every client they've scammed, every dollar they've stolen. And I want to know exactly when they're planning to meet Harold Whitman again. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Why? A cold smile spread across my face. Because Richard and Jennifer aren't the only ones who can plan a surprise announcement at a public event. And I think it's time we showed them exactly who they're dealing with. The next 48 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Marcus's investigation revealed a pattern of deception so elaborate it made my head spin. Richard hadn't just been planning to sell our house. He and Jennifer had been systematically targeting properties all along the Maine coast, using information from Richard's client files to identify vulnerable homeowners. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by documents and laptop screens, as Marcus walked me through their scheme. See these properties? He pointed to red pins on a digital map of the coastline, all owned by Richard's clients, all recently widowed, or going through divorces, all approached by Jennifer's company with too good to refuse offers. Sarah arrived with coffee and sandwiches, taking in the war room our kitchen had become. "I've been asking around at the club," she said, setting down the food. "You're not going to believe what I found out." I looked up from a particularly disturbing spreadsheet. "What?" "Remember that charity gala Jennifer chaired last spring? The one for historic preservation?" Sarah's eyes glittered with righteous anger. "It wasn't just a fundraiser. They were using it to identify potential targets, older homes, especially ones owned by elderly couples or people in financial distress." The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. Richard had insisted we attend that gala, even though I'd wanted to stay home and prepare for a student recital. He'd worked the room all evening, introducing Jennifer to our friends and neighbors, presenting her as a passionate advocate for historic preservation. "The ultimate con," Marcus muttered, adding more pins to his map. "Use a preservation charity as cover while plotting to flip historic properties for commercial development." My phone buzzed. Emma again. "Mom, Dad just called. He's acting like nothing's wrong, asking about our honeymoon plans. What should I tell him?" I thought carefully before responding. "Tell him you're too busy to talk. We don't want him suspicious." Lisa had brought in a forensic accountant who was tracing the money through a maze of offshore accounts and shell companies. The numbers were staggering. Richard and Jennifer hadn't just stolen from me. They'd been skimming from Richard's investment clients for months, using the money to fund their real estate schemes. "The Whitman connection is key," Marcus said, pulling up surveillance photos from Naples. "He's planning to announce a major development project next week, a chain of luxury resorts all along the New England coast. Your house was supposed to be one of the first properties." I stared at the photos, at Richard and Jennifer cozied, up to the distinguished Harold Whitman, champagne glasses in hand. "When exactly is this announcement?" "Thursday evening, big charity event at the Naples Grand. Whitman's using it to unveil his vision for historic preservation. That's what they're calling this development scheme." Marcus's lip curled in disgust. Sarah, who'd been quietly observing, suddenly sat up straighter. "Thursday? Isn't that the same night as the Portland Preservation Society's summer gala?" I felt a smile spread across my face. Not a nice one. "Yes, it is. And as a board member, I'm supposed to give a speech." Lisa, who'd been on the phone with her contacts at the SEC, hung up and joined our discussion. "Catherine, what are you thinking?" The plan was already forming in my mind. "Marcus, can you get me every detail about Whitman's announcement? Guest list, schedule, security arrangements, everything." He nodded. "Already on it. But what's the angle?" "Richard and Jennifer think they're going to blindside everyone with their big announcement. But what if we beat them to it?" I turned to Lisa. "How quickly can the SEC move once they have evidence?" "With what we've uncovered? Very quickly. But Catherine, if you're planning what I think you're planning, we need to be careful. These people are dangerous." I thought about my house, about my students, about all the other families Richard and his conspirators had targeted. They've been careful and quiet, working in the shadows. Well, I think it's time to shine a very bright light on everything they've been doing. Sarah grabbed my hand. "Whatever you're planning, I'm in." Marcus closed his laptop with a decisive click. "Me too. But we'll need help." I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts. Emma's new father-in-law is the editor of the Portland Press-Herald, and I believe Harold Whitman's ex-wife is still on the board of the Preservation Society. I looked up at my co-conspirators. "How do you all feel about attending a gala?" As we began to plot, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Richard's announcement at the wedding: hope. He thought he could destroy our life together and walk away unscathed. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Richard. "Catherine, please be reasonable. The house sale is just good business. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I showed the message to Lisa, who snorted. "Should I respond?" She shook her head. "Let him think he's winning. Thursday night, he'll find out exactly what good business looks like." The next 3 days were a masterclass in covert operations. While Richard and Jennifer prepared for their grand announcement in Naples, we orchestrated our own carefully choreographed performance. Emma's father-in-law, David Henderson, proved to be an invaluable ally. As editor of the Portland Press Herald, he had connections with every major news outlet in New England. "The story's too big for just local coverage," he said during our strategy session in his office. "I've got reporters from the Boston Globe and the New York Times interested. They're particularly keen on the charity angle, using a preservation society as cover for commercial development. That's going to make waves." Marcus had been working around the clock, building an airtight case. "We've identified 15 properties so far," he reported, spreading photographs across David's desk. "All owned by Richard's clients, all targeted for acquisition. 5 have already been sold to Jennifer's shell companies." I picked up one of the photos, a beautiful Victorian bed and breakfast owned by an elderly couple I'd known for years. "The Hendersons?" Richard handled their retirement planning. "Used to," Marcus corrected grimly. "They sold to Jennifer's company last month for half its market value. Richard convinced them the property needed extensive repairs they couldn't afford." The betrayal ran so deep it took my breath away. These weren't just clients. They were friends, neighbors, people who had trusted Richard with their financial futures. Sarah burst into the office, waving her phone. "You need to see this. Jennifer just posted again." We crowded around her screen. There was Jennifer, posed in front of a poster announcing the New England Heritage Resort Initiative. The caption read, "Can't wait to share our vision for preserving coastal history while creating luxury experiences. Thursday night's going to be unforgettable." "Oh, it certainly will be," I murmured. Lisa arrived with more ammunition. "The SEC is ready to move. They've been building their own case against Whitman for months. This will give them everything they need." I turned to David. "How many cameras can you get at the Portland Gala?" He smiled. "How many do you want?" The plan was coming together, but there was one piece still missing. I needed to make sure Richard and his conspirators wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late. That meant maintaining the illusion that I was exactly where they expected me to be. Devastated, defeated, and definitely not a threat. I picked up my phone and for the first time since the wedding called Richard. He answered on the first ring. "Catherine, I've been trying to reach you." "Save it." I cut him off, making sure my voice trembled slightly. "I'm calling about the house. When do you need my signature?" I could practically hear him trying to contain his excitement. "The buyers are eager to close next week. If you could just come to the office tomorrow." "I can't," I interrupted. "I have the Preservation Society Gala on Thursday. I have to give a speech." I let my voice break. "Probably my last one, since I won't be a board member anymore once we lose the house." "Catherine," his voice oozed false sympathy. "I know this is hard, but change can be good. You'll see. Once everything's settled." "I have to go," I said abruptly. "Just have your lawyer send the papers to Lisa." I hung up and looked at my co-conspirators. "He bought it?" Marcus nodded approvingly. "The speech angle was a nice touch. Makes him think you're too focused on local matters to notice what's happening in Naples." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Are you ready for Thursday?" I thought about the speech I'd prepared, not the one Richard expected me to give, but the one that would blow his entire operation wide open. I thought about the cameras that would be rolling, the reporters standing by, the SEC agents waiting. In the wings. Almost, I said. There's one more person we need to bring into the loop. They looked at me questioningly. Harold Whitman's ex-wife, I explained. Margaret Whitman isn't just on the Preservation Society board, she owns 30% of Whitman Development's voting shares, and I happen to know she's still bitter about Harold leaving her for his 25-year-old personal trainer. Lisa's eyes lit up. The shareholders' meeting is next month, if we can get her on our side. Exactly, I smiled. Harold won't just lose this development deal, he'll lose control of his company. David was already reaching for his phone. Margaret and I go way back. Let me set up a lunch. As they scrambled to set the final pieces in place, I walked to the window of David's office. From here, I could see the Portland waterfront, the historic buildings Richard and his cronies had planned to turn into overpriced resorts. My house was just one small part of their scheme, but they had picked the wrong woman to underestimate. Catherine, Sarah called softly. Margaret can meet us in an hour at the Cape Elizabeth Club. I turned back to my team, straightening my shoulders. Perfect. Let's go explain to Mrs. Whitman exactly how her ex-husband plans to destroy New England's historic coastline and how she can help us stop him. Margaret Whitman was exactly what you'd expect from old New England money, perfectly coiffed. Silver hair, understated designer clothes, and the kind of posture that comes from generations of finishing school. She sat across from me at the Cape Elizabeth Club, stirring her martini with precise movements as she absorbed everything we'd told her. So, she said finally, her cultured voice carrying just a hint of steel. Harold thinks he can turn the coast into his personal playground without anyone noticing? She set down her drink with a decisive click. How absolutely typical. I watched her carefully. You don't seem surprised. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. My dear, I was married to Harold for 30 years. The only surprising thing is that he thinks he can pull this off without me finding out. She turned to Marcus. Show me those property documents again. As Marcus spread out the evidence on the private dining room table, Margaret's expression grew increasingly thunderous. The Henderson property? And the old Mason place? She shook her head. Those houses have been in local families for generations. That's not even the worst of it, Sarah added, pulling up Jennifer's Instagram feed. They're marketing it as preservation through development, using local conservation groups as cover. Margaret's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table. And my replacement on the board, that Blake woman, she's involved. She's more than involved, I said quietly. She and my husband have been orchestrating the whole thing, using his client information to target vulnerable properties. Something flickered in Margaret's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or shared pain. She'd been betrayed too, after all. The shareholders' meeting is in 3 weeks, she said thoughtfully. Harold's planning to announce this development project as his grand vision for the company's future. He's been hinting at a major initiative that will revolutionize coastal real estate. Lisa leaned forward. With your shares, plus the evidence we've gathered of securities fraud and misuse of corporate resources, we could stop the project, Margaret finished. But that's not enough, is it? She fixed me with a penetrating stare. You want more than that. I met her gaze steadily. I want them to feel what it's like to have everything taken away in public, just like Richard did to me at my daughter's wedding. Margaret's smile turned predatory. Now that's something I can appreciate. She reached for her phone. Harold's not the only one with connections. Give me an hour. While Margaret made her calls, Marcus updated us on the Naples situation. Whitman's event is scheduled for 8 p.m. Thursday. They're expecting over 200 guests. Investors, developers, local politicians. Jennifer's company is handling the arrangements. And Richard? I asked. He's already there. Checked into the Naples Grande yesterday. He and Jennifer have been meeting with potential investors all day. My phone buzzed. Another text from Richard. Lawyers are drawing up the final paperwork. Everything's going to work out for the best, you'll see. I showed it to Lisa, who snorted. He really believes he's got it all wrapped up, doesn't he? Margaret returned, looking pleased with herself. Well, that's taken care of. I've spoken to several board members. They're concerned about Harold's recent decision-making, particularly after I mentioned certain irregularities in the company's property acquisitions. How concerned? Lisa asked. Concerned enough to call an emergency board meeting for Friday morning. Margaret's smile was arctic. The day after his big announcement. Sarah's phone pinged. She glanced at it and grinned. Jennifer just posted again. They're doing a press preview tomorrow morning. Can't wait to share our vision for the future of New England's coast. The future of New England's coast, Margaret repeated softly. You know, Harold used those exact words when he was convincing the board to approve his initial property acquisitions. He never could come up with his own material. I looked around at these women, Margaret with her old money influence, Sarah with her social network connections, Lisa with her legal expertise, and felt a surge of gratitude. None of them had hesitated to help, to fight back against men who thought they could take whatever they wanted. Tomorrow night, I said, Richard and his friends are going to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating women like us. Margaret raised her martini glass. 2 expensive lessons. As we clinked glasses, my phone buzzed one final time. A message from Emma. Just saw Jennifer's post about the Naples announcement. Dad's really going through with this, isn't he? I typed back quickly. Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything's under control. Just make sure you're watching the Portland news tomorrow night. The Portland news? Sarah asked, reading over my shoulder. I smiled. Richard always did love being the center of attention. Tomorrow night he's going to get his wish, just not quite the way he planned. Margaret set down her glass and fixed me with a serious look. You realize, once we do this, there's no going back. Harold won't just be angry, he'll be desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. I know, I replied, thinking of the look in Richard's eyes when he'd announced selling our house, that mixture of triumph and contempt. But you know what's more dangerous than desperate men? What's that? Women who have nothing left to lose. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through our house, my house, touching familiar surfaces, remembering. The kitchen where I'd taught Emma to bake cookies. The living room where Richard and I had spent countless evenings, planning our future. The piano room where I'd built my business, note by note, student by student. Everything looked exactly the same, yet everything had changed. My phone lit up with a text from Marcus. You need to see this. Turning on your laptop now. I hurried to my study, where my laptop screen flickered to life. Marcus had remote access to the security cameras at the Naples Grand, and there they were. Richard and Jennifer, dressed for dinner, looking cozy at the hotel's upscale restaurant. But it was their companion who caught my attention. Is that? I typed quickly. Gregory Sullivan, Marcus confirmed, head of the Maine State Banking Commission. My hands clenched into fists. Greg Sullivan had been at our house for dinner just last month, laughing at Richard's jokes, complimenting my cooking. Now here he was, deep in conversation with the man who'd betrayed me, betrayed all of us. How deep does this go? I wondered aloud. My phone rang. Lisa. Catherine? We have a problem. My stomach clenched. What kind of problem? Someone leaked tomorrow's guest list to Jennifer. She just posted about being sorry to miss seeing old friends at the Portland Gala, but promising exciting news from Naples. I closed my eyes, thinking fast. She's trying to get ahead of us. Make it look like their announcement was planned all along. That's not all, Lisa continued. Margaret just called. Harold's people have been reaching out to major shareholders. hinting at record-breaking profits from this new development. Project. Can they stop us? No, but they're trying to control the narrative. We need something more, something they won't see coming. Just then, Sarah burst through my front door without knocking, waving a manila envelope. "You're never going to believe what I found." She spread the contents across my kitchen table, old photographs, newspaper clippings, and what looked like letters. "Remember when you asked me to look into Jennifer's background? Well, I called my cousin who went to college with her." I picked up one of the photographs. It showed a younger Jennifer, standing in front of what looked like a construction site. Beside her was a man I recognized, Harold Whitman, 20 years younger but unmistakable. "Keep looking," Sarah urged. The next photo made me gasp. Jennifer, and Harold again, but this time they were clearly more than business associates. The date stamp showed it was taken 15 years ago, when Harold was still married to Margaret. "There's more," Sarah said grimly. "Letters, hotel receipts, even a private agreement about shares in his company. They've been involved for years, long before his divorce. And look at this." She pointed to a document. Jennifer's first real estate company, funded entirely by Whitman Development, through a series of shell corporations. My mind raced. So, when Harold left Margaret for his personal trainer. "It was a cover story," Sarah finished. "Jennifer was the real reason. They've been planning this for years, building her reputation in real estate, positioning her to handle these deals, and now they're using my husband to access local properties and connections," I finished. "Oh, Margaret is going to love this." I grabbed my phone, but Lisa stopped me. "Wait, we need to think about how to use this. If we play it wrong—" "I know exactly how to use it," I said, a plan forming in my mind. "Marcus, are you still there?" "Right here." His voice came through the laptop. "I need you to find everything you can about Jennifer's first real estate company. Every property, every transaction, every connection to Whitman Development. On it. But why? Because tomorrow night, we're not just going to expose their current scheme," I said, feeling a fierce satisfaction. "We're going to unravel 15 years of carefully constructed lies." Sarah's eyes widened. "The personal trainer? Will probably be very interested to know she was just a distraction," I nodded. "And the shareholders? We'll want to know about 15 years of hidden transactions and conflicts of interest," Lisa finished, catching on. "Catherine, this is perfect. But are you sure you want to go this far? Once we do this—" "They didn't just try to take my house," I said quietly. "They've been stealing people's homes, destroying families, corrupting everything they touch. And they were going to use my daughter's wedding day to kick off their biggest scheme yet." I looked at the photo of Jennifer and Harold again. They wanted to play with real estate? Fine. Let's show them what it really feels like to lose everything they've built. My phone buzzed one last time. Richard, of course. "Catherine, I know change is hard, but tomorrow's going to be a great day for everyone. Trust me." I showed the message to Sarah and Lisa, who both snorted in disbelief. "Oh, it's definitely going to be a day to remember," I said softly. "Just not the way you think, darling. Not the way you think at all." The morning of the gala dawned bright and clear in Portland, while a quick check of the Naples weather showed thunderstorms moving in, a fitting metaphor for what was about to unfold. I sat at my vanity, applying makeup with careful precision, when my phone lit up with a series of rapid-fire messages. First, from Marcus. "Press conference starting in Naples. Streaming link sent." Then from Sarah. "Channel 6 confirmed for tonight. 3 cameras plus live feed." And finally, from Margaret. "Board members in position. Harold doesn't suspect a thing." I opened Marcus's link on my laptop, watching as Jennifer Blake stepped up to a podium at the Naples Grand. She looked polished and professional in a cream-colored suit, her blonde hair gleaming under the lights. Richard stood slightly behind her, along with Harold Whitman and several other men in expensive suits. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jennifer began, her voice smooth as honey, "today marks the beginning of an exciting new chapter in coastal development." I listened with growing anger as she outlined their vision. Luxury resorts replacing historic homes, exclusive clubs where local businesses had stood for generations, all wrapped in pretty language about preservation through progress and maintaining community character. "The full details of our initiative will be announced at tonight's gala," she concluded with a practiced smile. "But I can tell you that this represents a billion-dollar investment in New England's future." The moment the press conference ended, my phone rang. Lisa. "Did you see that performance?" she asked without preamble. "Every stomach-turning minute," I replied, putting the final touches on my makeup. "How are we looking?" "Everything's in place. SEC agents will be at both events, Naples and Portland. They're coordinating with the main banking commissions. Fraud division. Gregory Sullivan's going to have some explaining to do." I thought of Greg, sitting at my dinner table, all while helping Richard and his cronies plan this scheme. Good. "Margaret's been brilliant," Lisa continued. "She's got the board eating out of her hand. The shareholders are already nervous about some of the numbers not adding up." A text popped up from Emma. "Just watched the press conference. Dad looks so pleased with himself." "Mom, what exactly are you planning?" I typed back quickly. "Just make sure you're watching Portland local news at 8 p.m. sharp." The doorbell rang. Sarah, right on time with coffee and bagels. She bustled into my bedroom, already dressed for the gala in a sleek black dress. "You'll never believe what Jennifer just posted," she said, handing me a coffee. "Look." I checked. Her phone. There was Jennifer, posed in front of a mirror in what was clearly a luxury hotel suite. Her caption read, "Getting ready for tonight's big announcement. Wish I could be in 2 places at once. Missing all my Portland friends." "She thinks she's so clever," Sarah muttered, trying to make it look like she has nothing to hide. "Oh, she has plenty to hide," I said, picking up a stack of documents from my dresser. "And in about 10 hours, everyone's going to know exactly what that is." Just then, my laptop pinged with an email from Marcus. He'd been busy. Property records, bank transfers, even private emails between Jennifer and Harold dating back 15 years. The web of deception was breathtaking in its complexity. "And these are just the records we could access legally," his note read. "Imagine what the SEC's forensic team will find once they start digging deeper." My phone buzzed again. Richard. I almost ignored it, but something made me look. "Darling, I know you're probably still upset about the house, but after tonight's announcement, you'll understand why this was all necessary. This is bigger than just us." I showed the message to Sarah, who made a disgusted noise. "He really believes he's the hero of this story, doesn't he?" "You know what the funny thing is?" I said, standing up to slip into my gala dress, midnight blue, elegant, perfect for making an unforgettable impression. "He's right about one thing. This is bigger than just us. That's exactly why we have to stop them." My phone lit up again. David Henderson this time. "Press packets ready, reporters briefed. You're sure about the timing?" "Absolutely," I replied. "The moment Jennifer and Richard start their announcement in Naples, we go live in Portland. I want them to see everything fall apart in real time." Sarah helped me fasten my necklace, my grandmother's pearls, the ones I'd worn at my wedding. "Are you nervous?" I met my reflection's eyes in the mirror. "No," I realized. For the first time since the wedding, I feel completely certain about what I'm doing. Lisa arrived just then, carrying garment bags with our backup outfits. "Car's ready. Margaret just texted. She's already at the venue, overseeing the final preparations." I took one last look around my bedroom, remembering all the mornings I'd spent here with Richard, planning our days, sharing our dreams. Tonight, I'd bring all his new dreams crashing down. But first I had a speech to give, just not the one he was expecting. "Ladies," I said, picking up my clutch, which contained copies of all our evidence. "Shall we go make some history?" Sarah grinned. "Let's go show them what happens when—" "You underestimate the wrong women." As we walked out to the waiting car, I felt a strange sense of calm. In Naples, Richard and Jennifer were probably congratulating themselves on their brilliant plan. In a few hours, they'd learn just how badly they'd miscalculated. The Portland Historical Society's annual gala was always an elegant affair, but this year they'd outdone themselves. The restored Victorian mansion that served as their headquarters was transformed, strings of lights turning the gardens into a fairyland, while inside, the grand ballroom sparkled with crystal and silver. "Channel 6 is set up in the library," Sarah whispered as we entered. "They're doing some preliminary interviews now, but they're ready to go live the moment you give the signal." I nodded, scanning the room. Already, Portland's elite were gathering. Old money families in designer clothes, local politicians working the crowd, real estate developers eyeing the historic architecture. How many of them, I wondered, were part of Richard and Harold's scheme? Margaret appeared at my elbow, resplendent in emerald green. "Harold just called," she murmured. "Wanted to know why I wasn't in Naples for their historic announcement. I told him I couldn't possibly miss my duties here." Her smile was razor sharp. "He actually bought it." My phone buzzed with updates from Marcus, who was monitoring. The Naples event. Room filling up. Jennifer working the crowd, Richard looking smug, SEC agents in position. Lisa joined us, champagne glasses in hand. "Everything's ready. The moment you start your speech, the SEC moves in Naples. The press releases go out simultaneously, and the board members are ready to call for an emergency vote first thing." "Tomorrow morning," Margaret finished. "Harold won't know what hit him." I checked my phone one last time. A message from Emma made me smile. "James's whole family is gathered around the TV. Dad has no idea we're about to watch his world implode." "Mrs. Mitchell?" The Historical Society's chairman approached, beaming. "We're about to begin. Are you ready for your speech?" "More than ready," I assured him, patting my clutch where my real speech waited, not the bland remarks about historic preservation he was expecting. As I made my way to the podium, I caught fragments of conversation from the crowd. "Did you see the press conference from Naples? Whitman Development's big announcement. Jennifer Blake's really made a name for herself." If they only knew. The chairman tapped his glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Portland Historical Society's annual gala. Before we begin tonight's festivities, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Mrs. Catherine Mitchell, who has been a tireless advocate for historic preservation." I took my place at the podium, looking out over the sea of familiar faces. How many of them had known about Richard's plans? How many had kept quiet, thinking they might profit from the scheme? "Thank you," I began, my voice steady. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about preservation lately, about what we choose to protect and what we allow to be destroyed." I could see Sarah positioning herself near the library doors, where the TV cameras waited. Margaret had moved to stand beside the major shareholders she'd quietly briefed. Lisa stood ready with her phone, waiting to give the signal that would set everything in motion. "My husband recently told me that change is inevitable," I continued. "That progress can't be stopped. He said this, interestingly enough, right after announcing at our daughter's wedding that he'd sold our historic home without consulting me." A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the speech they'd been expecting. But what my husband failed to understand is that true preservation isn't just about buildings. It's about integrity. It's about truth. And sometimes, to preserve what matters most, we have to expose what others would prefer to keep hidden. I nodded to Sarah, who opened the library doors. The TV cameras rolled in, red lights blinking. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden hush. I'm afraid this won't be the speech you were expecting. Instead, I'm going to tell you a story about greed, betrayal, and corruption that goes straight to the heart of Maine's historic preservation community. My phone lit up. Marcus. Jennifer just started her speech in Naples. They're live streaming. Perfect timing. Right now, in Naples, Florida, my husband Richard Mitchell and Jennifer Blake are making what they're calling a historic announcement about the future of New England's coastal properties. They're promising luxury resorts, exclusive developments, and what they call preservation through progress. I pulled out the first document from my clutch. What they're not telling you is how they plan to acquire these properties. They're not mentioning the elderly homeowners they've deceived, the families they've manipulated, or the 15-year conspiracy that brings us to this moment. The room was absolutely silent now, all eyes fixed on me. Through the cameras, I knew my words were reaching a much larger audience. And in Naples, Richard and Jennifer were about to have their perfect moment shattered. So let me tell you what's really been happening in our community, I said, my voice hard as steel. And let me show you exactly what preservation through progress really means to the people behind Whitman Development's grand vision. The trap was set. The cameras were rolling. And in 2 cities, the truth was about to explode like a bomb, destroying everything Richard and his conspirators had built on their foundation of lies. Let's start with this, I said, holding up the first photograph, Jennifer and Harold from 15 years ago. The image appeared on screens around the room, cameras zooming in tight. This was taken in 2009, when Harold Whitman was still married to Margaret Whitman, and Jennifer Blake was supposedly just a promising young real estate agent. A gasp went through the crowd. Margaret, right on cue, stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly. While my husband was claiming to be involved with his personal trainer, he was actually funding Ms. Blake's first real estate company through a series of shell corporations designed to hide their relationship. My phone buzzed. Marcus? Sending updates from Naples. Jennifer just stumbled over her speech. They've seen the Portland broadcast. Good. But this isn't just about a hidden affair, I continued, my voice steady. This is about a systematic conspiracy to defraud homeowners, manipulate property values, and destroy historic communities for profit. I pulled out the next set of documents, and the screens filled with transaction records, bank transfers, emails. Over the past 6 months alone, Richard Mitchell has used his position as a financial advisor to identify vulnerable properties. Elderly clients facing medical bills, families dealing with divorce or death, people who trusted him with their financial futures. The murmuring in the room grew louder. I could see several of Richard's clients in the crowd, their faces shifting from confusion to anger as they recognized their own properties in the documentation. Meanwhile, Jennifer Blake's company, funded by Whitman Development, has been approaching these same clients, offering to save them with below-market purchases. What they didn't know was that these properties were already slated for development as part of a massive luxury resort project. Another update from Marcus. SEC moving in. Richard trying to leave the podium. Jennifer looks like she's going to be sick. I clicked to the next slide, a map of the Maine coast, red pins marking all the targeted properties. This isn't preservation. This is predation. And it goes all the way to the top of our state's regulatory system. Right on cue, the doors opened, and 2 FBI agents entered, flanking Gregory Sullivan from the Banking Commission. The crowd parted as they led him out, cameras following every step. Mr. Sullivan has been kind enough to provide state regulators with a full confession, I announced, watching the color drain from several developers' faces. It seems he's been accepting bribes to fast-track certain property transactions while delaying investigations into complaints. My phone lit up with a call from Emma. I gestured to Sarah, who answered it and put it on speaker. Mom. Emma's voice rang out. They're showing everything in Naples. Dad just tried to run off stage, but security stopped him. Jennifer's crying, and Mr. Whitman is having some kind of meltdown. Perfect timing. I smiled at the cameras, knowing Richard could see me. Speaking of Mr. Whitman, I believe the SEC has some questions about 15 years of undisclosed transactions and conflicts of interest. And the shareholders might be interested in tomorrow morning's emergency board meeting. Margaret stepped forward again, her voice cold as ice. As a major shareholder, I've called for an immediate vote on leadership changes, given these revelations about long-term fraud and mismanagement. Lisa's phone buzzed. She checked it and gave me a thumbs up. The SEC had everything they needed. But perhaps the most personal betrayal, I continued, my voice softening, was using my daughter's wedding day to announce the sale of our home, a sale that, as it turns out, was completely illegal since I never signed any paperwork. A sale that was meant to be the first domino in their chain of property acquisitions. I looked directly into the cameras, knowing Richard was watching. You chose the wrong moment to betray me, darling. And you chose the wrong woman to underestimate. The room erupted in chaos as federal agents began moving through the crowd, approaching specific developers and business owners. Margaret was surrounded by shareholders, all demanding immediate action. Reporters were shouting questions, cameras flashing. Sarah appeared at my elbow with her phone. Look at this. Jennifer's Instagram was exploding with comments, her earlier smug posts now drawing fierce criticism. The Naples livestream showed security trying to maintain order as angry investors demanded explanations. Lisa joined us, grinning. SEC just confirmed they're seizing all assets pending investigation. The Naples property deals are frozen. And Richard is being taken into custody as we speak. Marcus's voice came through my phone. Along with Jennifer and Harold. You should see their faces. I felt a moment of vindication so pure it almost took my breath away. Sarah, is Channel 6 still live? She nodded. I turned back to the cameras, straightening my shoulders. To everyone who's been affected by this scheme, the homeowners, the families, the communities, I want you to know that this stops here. The perpetrators will face justice, the properties will be protected, and perhaps most importantly, I paused, allowing myself a small smile. My house is still mine, and I think I'll be keeping it. The next 24 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. I barely slept, watching as the story exploded across every news channel. By morning, what had started as a local scandal had become national news. Historic home heist, Maine's real estate conspiracy exposed, ran across the bottom of CNN. Wealthy developer's empire crumbles. After wife's revenge, declared the Boston Globe. Emma arrived early the next morning, letting herself in with her old key. She found me in the kitchen, surrounded by newspapers, my laptop open to yet another breaking news update. Mom, she said softly, wrapping her arms around me. You did it. You actually did it. I hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. I had help. A lot of help. James's father says the story's going viral. Every news outlet in the country wants an interview. She pulled back, studying my face. Have you heard from Dad? I shook my head. His lawyer called. Apparently they're trying to work out some kind of plea deal with the SEC, but Richard... I paused, still finding it strange to say his name. Richard won't be free for a very long time. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since last night. Messages from Richard's clients, thanking me for exposing the truth. Calls from other financial advisors, revealing similar schemes they'd witnessed. Texts from old friends, expressing support or sharing their own stories of betrayal and redemption. Sarah arrived with coffee and fresh bagels, followed shortly by Lisa with a stack of legal documents. The emergency board meeting just ended, Lisa announced, spreading papers across my kitchen table. Margaret's coup was successful. Harold's out as CEO, and the board's cooperating fully with the investigation. Jennifer's been posting again, Sarah added, pulling up Instagram on her phone. Gone were the smug selfies and luxury lifestyle shots. Instead, there was a single black square with a typed message. In light of recent events, I will be stepping back from public life to address certain legal matters. I ask for privacy during this difficult time. Privacy? I snorted. Like, the privacy they gave me when Richard announced selling our house at Emma's wedding. Emma squeezed my hand. About the wedding. James and I were talking. We want to have another reception. A real one, here at the house, to replace the memories of that day with better ones. Before I could respond, Marcus burst through the door, laptop in hand. You need to see this. They just released Richard's booking photo. We crowded around the screen. There was my husband of 30 years, looking disheveled and desperate. His silver hair a mess, his eyes wild. The man who'd stood so proudly at our daughter's wedding, thinking he was about to pull off the perfect crime, now reduced to a common criminal in an orange jumpsuit. The FBI's investigation is expanding, Marcus continued. They're looking into similar schemes in other states. Apparently, Whitman Development has been doing this for years, targeting historic properties, manipulating local officials, destroying communities for profit. What about the other homeowners? I asked. The ones who already sold? Lisa smiled. That's actually good news. Given the fraud involved, all those sales can be challenged. Most of them will probably be reversed. And with the evidence of Richard's breach of fiduciary duty, his clients can sue for damages. Speaking of damages, Sarah interjected, have you seen the comments on the Historical Society's social media? People are calling you a hero. You've become some kind of folk champion for historic preservation. I laughed at that, but it was true. My phone was full of messages from preservation societies across the country, asking me to speak at their events. Local homeowners wanted my advice on protecting their properties. Someone had even started a hashtag, "Don't mess with history makers." Mrs. Mitchell? A young reporter from the Portland Press-Herald stood in my doorway. I hadn't even heard the door open. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should know. We just got word from our Florida correspondent, Jennifer Blake. She's agreed to testify against Richard and Harold. She's turning over everything. Emails, contracts, recordings of meetings. She says she has evidence of crimes going back 15 years. I sat back, letting the news wash over me. Jennifer Blake, the other woman, the supposed mastermind, turning on her conspirators to save herself. It was almost poetic. Mom? Emma's voice brought me back to the present. Are you okay? I looked around my kitchen, in my house, where I'd raised my daughter and built my life. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the crystal wind chimes. I'd hung years ago, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the walls. You know what? I said slowly. I really am. For the first time since your wedding, I feel like I can breathe again. Sarah raised her coffee cup, to breathing, and to justice served. As we clinked cups, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from Margaret. Board meeting just ended. Harold's out. Company's in chaos. Shareholders are panicking. By the way, remember that personal trainer he supposedly left me for? Just gave an exclusive interview exposing how he paid her to play along with his cover story. Karma really is a beautiful thing, isn't it? I smiled, looking at the family photos still hanging on my walls, the piano visible through the doorway, the garden blooming outside my window. Richard had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he'd lost everything instead. Sometimes I reflected, the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth, it's surviving, thriving, and keeping your home in spite of those who tried to steal it. A month after the gala, life had settled into a new normal, though normal looked very different than it had before. The media frenzy had finally begun to die down, but the ripple effects of our exposé continued to spread. Every day seemed to bring new revelations, more arrests, additional investigations. I was in my piano room, teaching 8-year-old Tommy Anderson his scales, when Sarah burst in waving her tablet. She caught herself when she saw I had a student, mouthing, "sorry," and retreating to the kitchen. After Tommy's lesson ended, I found her practically vibrating with excitement. "Have you checked your email?" she demanded. "The New York Times wants to do a feature story, not just about the scandal. They want to focus on the preservation angle. How one woman's stand against corruption helped save historic communities up and down the coast." I shook my head, smiling. Don't they have more important things to write about? Are you kidding? This story has everything. Corruption, revenge, romance, real estate. It's like a Hollywood movie. She paused. "Speaking of which, have you thought about the film rights? 3 production companies have reached out to Lisa." "Let's focus on reality for now," I said, though I had to admit the idea was amusing. "How did the board meeting go this morning?" Sarah's eyes lit up. Margaret was brilliant. She's completely restructured Whitman Development's leadership. They're rebranding as Heritage Coast Preservation, with a genuine commitment to protecting historic properties. And guess who she's naming as head of community outreach? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Emma. "Mom, you're not going to believe this," she said without preamble. "Dad's lawyer just called James's father. They're trying to work out a plea deal, but there's a problem." Apparently, Jennifer's testimony opened up so many new lines of investigation that the prosecutors aren't interested in making any deals. I sat down at my kitchen table, absorbing this. What kind of new investigations? Properties in other states, offshore accounts, political bribes. It's huge, Mom. They're saying it could be one of the biggest real estate fraud cases in New England history. Just then, Lisa walked in, carrying her usual stack of legal documents. "Speaking of fraud cases," she said, having obviously heard Emma on speaker, "we just got the final paperwork. The attempt to sell your house has been officially voided. Not that there was any doubt, but it's nice to have it in writing." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. "So it's really over?" "The house part? Yes, the criminal cases? They're just getting started." Lisa spread some papers on the table. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit wants to interview you again. They're building a RICO case against Harold and his entire operation." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Just got access to Jennifer's private emails. You're going to want to see these. Coming over now." It seemed my quiet afternoon was about to become anything but quiet. Sure enough, within the hour, my kitchen had turned into command central again. Marcus's laptop showed email after email revealing the full scope of Jennifer and Harold's operation. Sarah monitored social media reactions. Lisa coordinated with prosecutors. Emma and James arrived with dinner for everyone. "Look at this thread," Marcus said, pointing to his screen. "They didn't just target Maine. They had similar operations planned for historic districts in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, even parts of coastal Connecticut." "And this is interesting," Sarah added, showing me her tablet. "Remember Jennifer's old real estate company? The one Harold secretly funded? 3 of their former employees have come forward, offering to testify about fraudulent practices dating back to 2010. As my team, because that's what they had become, worked to unravel more layers of the conspiracy, I stepped out onto my front porch for a moment of quiet. The evening was beautiful, the air heavy with the scent of my late summer garden. From inside, I could hear the murmur of voices, the occasional laugh, the sound of people working together to right a wrong. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unknown number. I opened it to find a short video clip. Richard, in his prison jumpsuit, being led into court for another hearing. He looked old, defeated. Nothing like the confident man who had stood up at our daughter's wedding to announce he'd sold our home. Mom? Emma had followed me outside. Are you okay? I showed her the video. She watched it silently, then took my hand. You know what's ironic? She said finally. Dad always said you were too focused on the past, too attached to this house and its history. But in the end, it was his actions that made history, just not the way he planned. I looked at our home, my home, with its wraparound porch and well-tended gardens, its walls full of memories both old and new. Through the windows, I could see my allies working to bring justice to others who had been wronged, using my story as a catalyst for change. Sometimes, I said, squeezing Emma's hand, the past is worth fighting for, especially when it helps protect other people's futures. Just as I finished speaking, Sarah burst through the front door, her face flushed with excitement. You need to see this, now. We followed her back into the kitchen, where Marcus was frantically typing on his laptop. I was going through Jennifer's older emails, he explained, and I found something strange. References to meetings from years ago, long before Richard was involved. What kind of meetings? Lisa asked, leaning over his shoulder. Look at these. Dates? Marcus pointed to his screen. 2008, 2007, even 2006. All involving property deals along the Maine coast. And look who was copied on every email. I gasped as I saw the name. Gregory Sullivan? But he wasn't even with the banking commission then. No, Marcus said grimly. He was working for a different organization entirely, one that supposedly exists to protect historic properties. The implications hit me like a thunderbolt. The Heritage Foundation? Lisa's eyes widened. The same foundation that's been certifying historic properties for tax credits all along the coast? The one that's been helping wealthy developers get approval for renovation projects that completely destroy historic buildings. Sarah finished. It's all connected. Emma, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. Mom, remember when Dad first joined the foundation's board? It was right after that big renovation project in Portsmouth failed. I did remember. Richard had been furious about that project being blocked by local preservationists. A month later, he'd been invited to join the Heritage Foundation's board, and suddenly all his development projects started sailing through approval. Marcus, I said, my voice tight with controlled anger, how deep does this go? He shook his head, still scrolling through emails. It's like a spider web. The Heritage Foundation, the Banking Commission, local zoning boards, they've all been working together for years. Your house wasn't just another property deal. It was going to be their showcase project, proving that even the most protected historic homes could be redeveloped. My phone rang. Margaret. Catherine, are you sitting down? Harold just tried to make a deal with prosecutors. He's offering to expose what he calls the entire preservation racket in exchange for leniency. How much does he know? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Everything, Margaret replied. He's been collecting evidence for years, apparently. Insurance against his partners ever turning on him. Documents, recordings, photographs, decades of corruption involving some of New England's most prominent families. Sarah, who had been monitoring social media, suddenly gasped. Oh my God! Jennifer just went live on Instagram. She's telling everything. We crowded around her phone, watching as Jennifer Blake, looking decidedly less polished than usual, spilled secret after secret. How the Heritage Foundation had been corrupted from within. How developers had used historic preservation laws as weapons, forcing small property owners to sell. How Richard had been brought in specifically because of his client list and community connections. I didn't want it to go this far, Jennifer was saying, her voice shaking. It was supposed to be simple real estate deals, but then Harold started talking about reimagining the entire coast, and Richard saw a chance to profit from his client's trust, and it spiraled. Lisa was already on her phone to the prosecutors. Are you seeing this? We need to get her official testimony before someone decides to shut her up. There's more, Marcus announced. He had connected his laptop to my TV, displaying a complex web of connections. Look at these property transfers. Every time the Heritage Foundation certified a building as historic, its owners would suddenly face mounting preservation costs. Then, mysteriously, a developer would appear with a solution. It was the perfect scheme, Lisa said, her voice hard. Use preservation laws to pressure owners, then swoop in as saviors offering to maintain the historic character while actually planning to demolish everything. Emma, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Dad's lawyer is calling again. He says Dad wants to talk to you, Mom. In person. The room fell silent. I looked around at my unlikely team of investigators and supporters, then at my daughter's concerned face. Tell him, I said finally, that I'll meet with Richard on one condition. He doesn't just confess to what he did to me, to our family. He exposes everyone involved in this scheme, going back decades, every corrupt official, every fraudulent certification, every family that's been pressured or cheated out of their home. Catherine, Lisa cautioned, are you sure? Some of these people are very powerful. I thought about my house, about all the other historic homes along the coast, about the communities that had been destroyed and the families that had been uprooted. Yes, I said firmly. It's time to tear down this whole corrupt system. And Richard's going to help us do it, whether he wants to or not. The Cumberland County Jail was a stark contrast to the elegant historic homes Richard had spent years plotting to destroy. I sat in the sterile visiting room, Lisa beside me waiting. We'd insisted on recording the conversation, a condition Richard's lawyers had initially resisted, but ultimately accepted. When they brought him in, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished financial advisor with his tailored suits and confident smile. This Richard was haggard, his silver hair unkempt, his prison jumpsuit hanging loose on his frame. Only his eyes were the same, calculating, always calculating. Catherine, he said softly, sitting down across from me. Thank you for coming. I'm not here for you, Richard, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I'm here for the truth. All of it. He nodded, glancing at Lisa and the recording device between us. I know. That's why I asked to see you. There are things you need to understand. Like how you used our daughter's wedding to announce selling my home? Or how you betrayed your client's trust? Or maybe how you've been part of a decades-long conspiracy to destroy historic communities? Richard flinched at each accusation, but didn't deny them. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said finally. When I joined the Heritage Foundation Board, it was just supposed to be networking, making connections. But then I saw how it really worked, how much money could be made if you knew the system. And that justified everything? I demanded. The lies, the manipulation, using your position to target vulnerable clients? You don't understand. He leaned forward, his voice urgent. The foundation. It's not just about real estate. Some of New England's most powerful families are involved. Old money, old secrets. They needed someone like me, someone with connections to smaller property owners, someone who could help them expand their influence. Lisa spoke up for the first time. And Jennifer Blake? How does she fit into all this? A bitter smile crossed Richard's face. Jennifer was Harold's protege long before I met her. She'd been working this scheme in other states, helping developers use preservation laws as weapons. When Harold introduced us, it wasn't about romance, it was about business. She needed my client list. I needed her connections. And our house? I asked, my voice hard. Was that business too? That was... He hesitated. That was meant to be a statement. The foundation wanted to prove they could acquire any property, no matter how well protected. Your activism in the preservation community made our house the perfect target. I felt the anger rise in my throat. Our house? You lost the right to call it that the moment you tried to sell it behind my back. Catherine, please. He reached across the table, but I pulled back. I can help make this right. I have documents, records going back years, names of everyone involved, details of every fraudulent deal. Why now? Lisa asked sharply. Why are you suddenly willing to talk? Richard's facade cracked slightly. Because they're going to turn on me. Harold, Jennifer, the foundation, they're all looking for deals. And I'm the easiest target, the corrupt financial advisor who betrayed his clients. They'll pin everything on me if they can. So this isn't about doing the right thing, I said coldly. It's about saving yourself. Does it matter? He countered. The information is real. Names, dates, transactions, everything you need to expose the whole system, even things you haven't discovered yet. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Jennifer's testimony just implicated 3 state senators and a federal judge. This is bigger than we thought. I showed it to Lisa, who nodded slightly. We'd discussed this possibility, that the corruption might reach into the highest levels of state government. All right, Richard, I said finally. Start talking. But understand something. This isn't a deal. This isn't forgiveness. This is you finally doing what you should have done years ago, telling the truth. For the next 2 hours, Richard laid out the entire scheme. How the Heritage Foundation had been corrupted from within, its preservation mission twisted into a tool for developers. How certain families had maintained their power by controlling which properties could be preserved and which could be destroyed. How Richard himself had been groomed to exploit his position as a trusted financial advisor. The Foundation's annual gala next month, he said, his voice tired. That's when they're planning to announce their biggest project yet, a complete reimagining of the entire New England coast. Historic districts rezoned, preservation laws rewritten, whole communities transformed. Lisa was taking rapid notes. We'll need proof. It's in a safe deposit box, Richard replied. Account, number, and key location are hidden in my office at home, in the false bottom of the leftmost desk drawer. I've been keeping insurance for years, just in case. As we stood to leave, Richard called out one last time. Catherine, I know it doesn't matter now, but I am sorry. Not just for the house, but for everything. I turned back to look. At him. This stranger who had shared my life for 30 years, who had helped raise our daughter, who had betrayed everything we'd built together. You're right, Richard. It doesn't matter. But the truth does. And now, finally, everyone's going to know it. Back at my house, the team gathered to process Richard's revelations. Marcus had already retrieved the documents from the safe deposit box, and what we found was explosive. Years of detailed records, photos, emails, contracts, even recorded conversations, all meticulously organized and annotated. He really was keeping insurance, Sarah marveled, spreading documents across my dining room table. Look at this. Every corrupt deal, every bribed official, every threatened homeowner. He documented everything. Lisa was on the phone with federal prosecutors, her voice tight with controlled excitement. Yes, we have it all. No, this goes way beyond real estate fraud. We're talking about RICO charges, corruption at every level of state government, possibly even federal involvement. Emma sat beside me, scanning through a list of names. Mom, these are people we know. People who've been to our house for dinner. People who've been destroying communities for profit, I finished grimly. Using preservation laws to line their own pockets while forcing families out of their homes. Marcus looked up from his laptop. The Foundation's gala is in 3 weeks. According to these documents, they're planning to announce something called the Coastal Heritage Initiative. It's massive, rezoning entire historic districts, changing preservation laws, essentially giving developers free rein to destroy anything they want. Not if we can help it. Margaret's voice came from the doorway. She strode in, looking energized despite the late hour. The board's already suspicious after everything that happened with Harold. If we can prove the foundation itself is corrupt. We can, I said, holding up a particular file. Richard kept records of every foundation board meeting for the past decade, including private discussions about using preservation laws to force property sales. Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. We need to think bigger than just stopping their announcement. This is our chance to expose the entire system. What are you thinking? Lisa asked. The gala's always covered by local media, right? But what if we made it national news? What if we turned their big announcement into our big revelation? I felt a smile spread across my face, the same kind of smile I'd worn at my own gala weeks ago. Like we did with Richard and Jennifer's Naples announcement? Exactly, Sarah nodded. But bigger. We have all the evidence now. We can show exactly how they've been corrupting the system, who's been involved, how many families they've hurt. Marcus was already typing. I can coordinate with news outlets. After what happened with Whitman Development, they'll be all over this, especially with these names involved. We'll need protection, Lisa cautioned. These people won't go down without a fight. Some of them have serious political connections. Already handled, Margaret said smoothly. I've been in touch with certain federal agencies. They're very interested in what we've uncovered. Apparently, they've been trying to build a case against some of these families for years. Emma, who had been reading through more documents, suddenly gasped. Mom, look at this. The foundation wasn't just targeting individual properties. They were planning to essentially rewrite preservation laws across the entire Northeast. They were going to use our house as the test case, prove they could force a sale even with historic protection in place. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about real estate or even corruption. This was about systematically dismantling the protections that kept historic communities intact, that preserved our shared heritage. 3 weeks, I said finally. 3 weeks to organize everything, coordinate with law enforcement, prepare the media, and make sure we have ironclad evidence against everyone involved, Lisa added. We can't leave any loopholes they could use to escape. Sarah was already on her phone, her social media expertise turning to a new purpose. We need to start laying the groundwork now. Get people talking about historic preservation, about community rights, about the importance of protecting our heritage. I can help with that, Emma offered. James's newspaper connections, plus all the attention from what happened at my wedding. We can use it to build interest in the story. Margaret nodded approvingly. And I can work my society connections, get people asking questions about the foundation, about certain board members' recent property acquisitions. As my allies, my friends, planned our final move, I walked to my piano room. The evening light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the floor. This room, this house, had become more than just my home. It had become a symbol of resistance against corruption, a rallying point for everyone who'd ever faced similar threats. My phone buzzed. Another message from Richard's lawyer. He's willing to testify, to name names, to confirm everything in those documents. Tell him, I typed back, that his testimony won't change anything between us, but it might help save other families from going through what we did. Looking around at my team, I felt a fierce pride. Richard and his cronies had thought they could destroy communities with impunity, that their money and connections would protect them forever. In 3 weeks, they'd learn just how wrong they were. The night of the Heritage Foundation's annual gala arrived clear and cold, with an autumn crispness in the air that seemed to sharpen every sense. I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the emerald green evening gown Sarah had insisted I wear. "If we're going to take down the corrupt elite," she'd said, "we might as well look fabulous doing it." My phone hadn't stopped buzzing all day. Updates from Marcus about media positions. CNN, NBC, and Fox News all in place. Local stations standing by. New York Times has 3 reporters on site. From Lisa. FBI and SEC coordinated. They're waiting for our signal. State Police Cybercrimes Unit monitoring all digital communications. From Margaret. Board members are nervous. Someone tipped them off that something's coming, but they don't know what. Perfect. Emma arrived early, helping me with my jewelry. My grandmother's pearls again, for luck. "The newspaper's website is ready," she reported. "James's father has the full story written, just waiting for the go-ahead. Once you give the signal, it goes live on every major news site simultaneously." Sarah bustled in, already dressed in elegant black, her tablet displaying multiple social media feeds. "You won't believe what people are saying. Someone leaked that there's going to be a major announcement about coastal development. The foundation's trying to spin it as positive news, but there's already pushback. Save Our Coast is trending." "Good," I said, fastening my earrings. "Let them think they're still in control. For about 1 more hour." My phone rang. Lisa. "Catherine, we have a situation. The Foundation's security team is turning away reporters at the door, claiming private event status. They're getting suspicious." I smiled. "Tell them to wait. When the time comes, they won't need to be inside. The story will come to them." The gala was being held at the Foundation's headquarters, a magnificent restored mansion overlooking Portland Harbor. As we pulled up in Margaret's luxury SUV, I could see the uncertainty on the faces of the security team. They knew me as a board member, but after what had happened with Richard. "Mrs. Mitchell," the head of security stepped forward. "I'm afraid we need to verify your credentials." Margaret swept past him, her society manner in full force. "Don't be ridiculous, Charles. Catherine is not only a board member, but tonight's keynote speaker. Or perhaps you'd like to explain to the chairman why his carefully planned program has been disrupted?" He stepped back, properly cowed. As we entered the grand foyer, I could feel the tension in the air. Board members clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Regular Foundation members tried to maintain a facade of normality, but their eyes kept darting to their phones, to the conspicuously absent media, to the unusual number of serious-looking men speaking quietly into earpieces. "Right on schedule," Marcus murmured, appearing beside us. "They've just announced the Coastal Heritage Initiative to the board. They're planning to go public with it in 30 minutes. I checked my phone one last time. Everything was in place. The documents from Richard's safe deposit box had been verified and digitized. Federal agents were stationed at strategic locations. News teams were standing by. And most importantly, every person who had ever been threatened or pressured by the Foundation's corrupt practices was about to have their story heard. "Mrs. Mitchell!" The Foundation's chairman, Douglas Blackwood, approached with forced joviality. "We've been so looking forward to your speech, especially given recent events." "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied smoothly. "In fact, I've prepared something special, a comprehensive look at the Foundation's preservation efforts." Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty? Fear? "Wonderful," he said, though his smile had become fixed. "We're actually planning a rather significant announcement ourselves tonight." "I know," I said, holding his gaze. "The Coastal Heritage Initiative. It's quite ambitious, isn't it? Rewriting preservation laws, rezoning historic districts, streamlining the protection process." He took a half step back. "How did you—" "Oh, I've learned quite a lot recently," I continued, my voice carrying just far enough to draw attention from nearby groups. "About preservation, about development, about how certain people use their positions to profit from destroying historic communities. The room had gone quiet, all pretense of casual conversation abandoned. I could see board members reaching for their phones, probably trying to contact lawyers or PR teams. But it was too late. Sarah gave me a subtle nod. Our preparations were complete. Margaret positioned herself near the main exits, where security. Teams would find it difficult to interfere. Lisa's phone lit up with a message from the federal agents. "Ready when you are." I turned back to Douglas, whose face had gone pale. "You know, it's interesting. When my husband tried to sell my house without my consent, I thought it was just about greed. I had no idea it was part of something so much bigger, so much more corrupt." "Catherine," he said, his voice low and warning, "think very carefully about what you're about to do." I smiled. Not a nice smile, but the same one I'd worn the night I exposed Richard's schemes. "Oh, I have thought about it. For weeks. And now it's time for everyone else to think about it too." With perfect timing, the grand ballroom's screens flickered to life, Marcus's handiwork. Gone were the Foundation's planned presentation slides about the Coastal Heritage Initiative. Instead, documents began to appear. Internal emails, board, meeting minutes, financial records, all revealing the true nature of their preservation efforts. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying across the now silent room, "I believe it's time for a different kind of announcement. One about how this foundation has betrayed its mission, its communities, and every principle of historic preservation it claims to uphold." Douglas lunged for his phone, but it was too late. Sarah's social media campaign had already launched. Outside, news vans were going live. Every major network, every local station, all broadcasting simultaneously. "For years," I continued, as more documents appeared on the screens, "this foundation has used its position to force property sales, manipulate zoning laws, and destroy historic communities for profit. My own home was meant to be their crowning achievement, proof that no property was beyond their reach, no historic designation safe from their influence." "Security!" Douglas barked, but Margaret's carefully placed allies blocked the doors. The FBI agents who had been posing as waiters now revealed their badges. "But it wasn't just about my house," I went on, my voice steady. "It was about every family who's been pressured to sell, every community that's been torn apart, every piece of history that's been erased for profit." The screens now showed a map of the New England coast, red pins marking every property the Foundation had targeted. As we watched, blue pins began appearing, properties already lost, communities already destroyed. "Mrs. Mitchell," a board member stepped forward, his face ashen, "these are very serious accusations." "They're not accusations," Lisa interrupted smoothly, joining me at the front of the room. "They're documented facts, facts that federal prosecutors are very interested in." As if on cue, more FBI agents entered the ballroom. Outside, we could hear the commotion as news crews pushed past security, cameras rolling. "Did you really think no one would notice?" I asked, addressing the board members directly. "Did you think you could hide behind preservation laws while systematically destroying the very things those laws were meant to protect?" The screens now showed faces, families who had lost their homes, community leaders who had been threatened, honest officials who had been pushed out when they refused to cooperate. "Catherine," Douglas tried one last time, his voice desperate, "think about what you're doing. The Foundation's reputation?" "The Foundation's reputation?" I laughed. "You mean the reputation you've used as a weapon? The one you hide behind while destroying communities?" Emma appeared at my side, tablet in hand. "It's gone viral, Mom. Every major news outlet is carrying the story. The governor's office just announced an emergency investigation. 3 state senators have already issued statements distancing themselves from the foundation. Sarah was monitoring social media. Foundation fraud is trending nationwide. People are sharing their own stories of being pressured to sell historic properties. It's a flood. I turned back to Douglas and the board members, many of whom were now frantically speaking with lawyers on their phones. You know what the truly ironic thing is? You've spent years trying to erase history, but tonight, you're making it. This will be remembered as the night the truth finally came out. Federal agents have seized the Foundation's servers, Marcus O. reported from his laptop. They're finding even more than what Richard gave us. Offshore accounts, shell companies, evidence of bribes going back decades. The room erupted in chaos as agents began approaching specific board members. Douglas, his face now the color of old paper, was already being read his rights. Others were trying to delete files from their phones, only to find their devices locked by the cybercrimes unit. Margaret stepped forward, her voice carrying over the commotion. As a major donor to this foundation, I move for an immediate suspension of all current board members pending investigation. Do I have a second? Hands shot up across the room. Other donors, community members, people who had watched helplessly as their neighborhoods were carved up for profit. The motion passes, Margaret declared with satisfaction. And I believe the FBI has some questions for several of you. As federal agents led Douglas and others away, I felt Emma's hand slip into mine. Mom, are you okay? I looked around the ballroom where, just weeks ago, I had exposed Richard's betrayal. Now I had helped expose something even bigger, a conspiracy that had threatened not just my home, but countless others. You know what? I said, watching as reporters swarmed into the room, cameras flashing. I really am. Sometimes the best way to preserve history is to make some of your own. The days following the Foundation's gala passed in a whirlwind of activity. Every hour seemed to bring new revelations, more arrests, additional evidence of just how deep the corruption had run. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by newspapers bearing headlines like Historic Preservation Scandal Rocks New England and Federal Investigation Expands, Prominent Families Named. Sarah burst in, barely pausing to kick off her heels. You won't believe what just happened. Jennifer Blake just gave a full interview to 60 Minutes. She's naming everyone, developers, politicians, judges. She's even turning over recordings of private Foundation meetings. Trying to save herself, Lisa observed, not looking up from her legal papers. But it might be too late. The FBI found evidence linking her to similar schemes in 3 other states. My phone buzzed. Emma sending updates from Boston. Dad's lawyer called again. Prosecutors are offering him a deal in exchange for testimony against the Foundation's board members. James's father wants to interview him for the paper. I thought about Richard sitting in his cell, watching as the corrupt system he'd been part of crumbled around him. Tell James's father to wait, I typed back. There's a bigger story coming. Marcus arrived with his laptop, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The cybercrimes unit just cracked the Foundation's encrypted files. You're not going to believe this. They found evidence of similar operations in historic districts all along the East Coast. They were planning to expand nationwide. And now? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Now they're all scrambling to save themselves, he grinned. Board members turning on each other, developers revealing secrets they've kept for years, politicians suddenly remembering details about suspicious property deals. Margaret swept in, looking energized despite the chaos. The emergency board meeting just ended. We've voted to dissolve the current foundation and establish a new organization, one actually dedicated to historic preservation. Catherine, we want you to lead it. I blinked in surprise. Me? Who better? Sarah chimed in. You're already being called a hero in preservation circles. People trust you. They know you'll fight for what's right. Before I could respond, Lisa's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she looked up with a satisfied smile. That was the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're expanding the RICO investigation. Apparently, some of these families have been using historic properties to hide money laundering operations for generations. Speaking of families, Emma said from the doorway. I hadn't even heard her come in. The Hendersons got their bed and breakfast back. The court voided the sale this morning. They're not the only ones. Properties all over New England are being returned to their rightful owners. I stood up and walked to my piano room, letting my fingers trail over the keys. This room, this house, had become more than just my home. It had become a symbol of resistance, a reminder that sometimes one person standing up could inspire others to do the same. Mom? Emma followed me. Are you thinking about Dad? I nodded. I got a letter from him this morning. He tried to explain, to justify everything he did. Said he got caught up in the power, the prestige of being part of something bigger than himself. And nothing. The man I married, the man who helped raise you, who built a life with me in this house. That man died the moment he decided to betray everything we believed in. Sarah appeared with coffee. She always seemed to know when it was needed. Have you seen today's Preservation Society newsletter? They're calling it the Mitchell Effect. Historic homeowners across the country standing up to corrupt developers, demanding investigations into suspicious property deals. My phone buzzed again, Marcus sending more updates. Douglas Blackwood just pleaded guilty. He's naming names, including 3 federal judges and a senator. This is going nuclear. Good, Margaret said firmly. Let them all fall. They've spent years profiting from destroying our heritage. It's time they face the consequences. Lisa joined us, legal papers still in hand. The class action lawsuit is growing. Over 200 families have joined so far, all with similar stories about being pressured to sell historic properties. The damages could run into billions. I looked around at my unlikely team of allies, now friends, who had helped expose a conspiracy that had threatened not just my home, but countless others. Sarah with her social media expertise, Marcus with his technical skills, Lisa with her legal knowledge, Margaret with her society connections, and Emma, my brave daughter who had turned her ruined wedding day into the catalyst for change. So what now? Emma asked, echoing my thoughts. I smiled, thinking of all the work ahead, rebuilding the foundation, helping other families recover their homes, ensuring this kind of corruption could never happen again. Now, I said, we make sure history remembers not just what they tried to destroy, but how we stopped them, and we make sure no one ever forgets that sometimes the greatest preservation work isn't just about saving buildings. It's about saving the heart and soul of our communities. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of my piano room, casting familiar rainbow patterns across the floor. I sat at my beloved grand piano, watching as my newest student, 7-year-old Lucy Henderson, carefully picked out her scales. Her grandmother, now securely back in possession of their historic bed and breakfast, had insisted on lessons. "Very good, Lucy," I praised as she finished. "You're making excellent progress." As Lucy packed up her music sheets, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Former Heritage Foundation board member sentenced in historic preservation fraud case. Another domino falling in what the media had dubbed the preservation conspiracy. The investigation had grown far beyond New England, exposing similar schemes across the country. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Lucy's voice pulled me back to the present. "Is it true what Grandma says? That you saved all the old houses?" I smiled, thinking of how much had changed in a year. "Not just me, sweetheart. A lot of brave people helped expose the truth." After Lucy left, I walked through my house, my home, touching familiar surfaces, remembering everything that had happened. The kitchen where we'd planned our strategy, the dining room where we'd pored over Richard's documents, the porch, where I'd first realized something was wrong. Sarah arrived with our morning coffee, a daily ritual now. Have you seen the latest Preservation Society numbers? Membership has tripled since we reorganized. People really believe in the mission. Now. Speaking of believing, Margaret swept in, elegant as ever. The new foundation's first major project is ready to launch. 5 historic districts fully protected, with community oversight to prevent any future corruption. My phone lit up with a text from Emma. Mom, turn on CNN. They're doing a special report on Dad's testimony. I switched on the TV just in time to see Richard, looking older but composed, describing how the corruption had spread through New England's preservation community. He was serving his sentence at a minimum security facility, his cooperation having earned him some leniency. We hadn't spoken since that day in the prison visiting room, and I doubted we ever would again. Hard to believe it's been a year, Lisa said, joining us with her ever-present legal files. The class action suit is finally settled. Over 300 families compensated, dozens of properties returned to their rightful owners. And Jennifer Blake? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Serving 10 years, Marcus replied, looking up from his laptop. Her testimony helped bring down some big players, but the judges weren't feeling very lenient. Turns out she'd been running similar schemes since college. I walked to my front porch, my friends following. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of my late-blooming roses. Across the street, another historic home was undergoing proper restoration, funded by the new foundation's preservation grants. You know what today is, don't you? Sarah asked softly. I nodded. 1 year ago today, Richard had stood up at Emma's wedding and announced he'd sold our house, setting in motion events none of us could have predicted. Speaking of Emma, I said, everyone's still coming tomorrow for the vow renewal? They all nodded. Emma and James had decided to celebrate their first anniversary by having the wedding reception they'd originally planned, right here in our backyard. A chance to replace painful memories with joyful ones. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unexpected source. Harold Whitman's ex-wife, the personal trainer he'd used as cover for his affair with Jennifer. Thought you'd want to know? Harold's corruption trial starts next week. Need another front row seat? I smiled, remembering how she'd joined our cause once the truth about her ex-husband's deception came out. Another ally in our growing network of preservation advocates. You know, Margaret mused, sipping her coffee, when I first joined your crusade, I thought it was just about exposing Harold and saving some old houses. I never imagined we'd end up revolutionizing historic preservation across the country. The Mitchell effect, Sarah quoted, referencing the term that had become common in preservation circles. One woman's stand against corruption becoming a national movement. Not just one woman, I corrected her. Look at us, a society maven, a social media expert, a lawyer, a tech genius, and a piano teacher. Who would have thought we'd end up changing history? Speaking of history, Lisa interjected, the governor's office called. They want you to chair the new State Historic Preservation Commission. A chance to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. I looked out at my neighborhood, at the historic homes that had been saved, at the communities that remained intact. Richard had tried to take everything from me, but in doing so, he'd set me on a path to saving so much more than just my own home. You know what the funny thing is? I said finally. Richard always claimed I was too focused on the past, too committed to preservation. He never understood that preserving history isn't about living in the past. It's about protecting our future, about making sure the stories of our communities, our families, our homes live on. As my friends murmured agreement, I thought about all the changes the past year had brought. I'd lost a husband but gained an army of allies. I'd faced betrayal but found strength I never knew I had. And most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the biggest victories come not from fighting alone, but from inspiring others to stand up and fight alongside you. So, Sarah raised her coffee cup, here's to the future of preservation. No, I corrected, raising my own cup. Here's to preserving our future, one historic home at a time.